Welcome to The Rippling Pages, a podcast on the craft of writing, crafted and curated by me, Liam Bishop. Now, would you put your feelings of empathy to the test? Well, Psych, an organisation who wants to introduce mandatory psychological assessments and empathy testing as a way of deterring social orders and behaviours, might just do that. As the country prepares for a referendum on whether to introduce such measures, misinformation, protests and violence are spreading. Sounds uncannily familiar, doesn't it? Well, this is the premise of Frida Ísberg's novel, The Mark, which is set in her home country, Iceland. This is Frida's first full-length work to be translated into English by Larissa Kaiser for Faber Books, but she has quite the resume already. Her books are poetry collections Stretch Marks and Leather Jacket Weather, the short story collection Itch, as well as the novel we're discussing today. They've collected prizes such as the Friða Literature Prize, the Icelandic Booksellers Award, the P&O Enquist Award, and in 2021 she was a recipient of the Optimist Award, which is handed by the President of Iceland to one national artist. Frida is a member of the Writers Collective Ísberg, and she occasionally writes reviews for the Times Literary Supplement. Her work has been translated into 19 languages. Frida, it's an absolute delight to have you here. Welcome to the Rippling Pages. Where are you based, if you don't mind my asking?
I am based, and hello, Liam. Thank you for having me. I am based in Reykjavik, in downtown, in the west part of downtown, which is close to the harbor.
Beautiful. Well, let's just get down to it at first, and just tell us about this referendum that's at the heart of your novel and how it relates to this idea of the mark.
We're in a near future society where half of the population is pro marking. So we have the official register of whether people have passed the empathy test or not. And it's voluntary at the moment. You can just mark yourself and then everybody can look you up and see if you passed or failed. And 2/3 of the country have undergone the test and marked themselves. But now the Psychologists Association of Iceland really wants to make the testing mandatory. And so there will be held a referendum in 2 months' time from the beginning of the novel. 1% is assumed to fail. They are offered rehabilitation, they are offered treatments. The promise is that, that you can fail and then pass it later on if you go through therapy. And the same as the vice versa. You can pass the test at one point and then 2 years later you can fail it. So basically that's kind of the premise that the psych or the Psychological Association is working with, that they are integrating people, they are helping people become better public citizens. And then there's the anti-marking site, which is called Musk, which started out kind of like a men's rights movements because the young boys are the biggest demographic that's failing the test. You don't really know which side the coin will fall in the end.
I don't want to put an English, British slant on this too much, but you kind of got these two opposing sides. You got your kind of vote, leave, stay. It kind of makes me think of the Brexit referendum. But you've got these two opposing sides. You've got Psych, and you've got Musk. Who are the kind of main players then for some of these organizations?
Well, okay, so I have 4 main characters I basically started out with stereotypes. More private and public spaces, due to the marking, are closing their gates to the unmarked population. So that's really what is dividing everybody, is that there are you're already creating a 2-tier society. But so she has been stopped, Vetur has been stopped, and she's teaching in this marked neighborhood and using it kind of as a refuge while living in an unmarked neighborhood. So she's kind of conflicted about the referendum. Then we have, because I was working with stereotypes and empathy and prejudice, and what baggage the reader will bring to the book, then I wanted to try out these stereotypes and kind of see how I could make everything more gray with each character. So, obviously just kind of work with the preconceptions of the character. And it's the same with at the end, the pro is that, I took a lot of reverberations from our political contemporary time and kind of, took some from the right and some from the left and put it on the anti-voters in the mark. So you couldn't really put it clean cut into which one you're supposed to take sides with, if that
That's
makes sense.
interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, thinking about it now, you see the division, but the ideology is kind of there is to some extent. They're the ones that are kind of projecting this image. The other side is kind of woke. You probably naturally more identify these as the kind of liberal government organization trying to implement a kind of nanny state, but it's kind of not. It's not determined like that, is it?
Hmm.
So what was going on in what was going on at the time you were writing this to create such a vivid society that that you depict in the mark?
Well, a lot of things were simmering at the time. I got the idea in 2018. 2 years prior, I had been working as the summer intern at the TLS in London, and I was working in London while Brexit happened. So
Okay.
it was just like very vivid for me the day after the Brexit went through, just coming into the office and having worked in this London bubble, and nobody really believed that it would happen. And then, like, just coming into the office and people were crying in the bathroom, and, complete silence, in the whole news tower, basically. And it was just very impactful, I thought. At the same time, obviously, the world leaders were Trump and Bolsonaro and Boris Johnson. And the idea in 2018 that I got was just, what if I would flip these power structures around and, in 20 years, we would only vote for empathetic leaders and soft-spoken leaders. And then the idea came, like, how would they prove that they're empathetic? And then the idea of the test came about. Another thing that was happening in my life. So if I just go way, way back, then I will tell you that I grew up with a single dad, and he was, the coolest dad of the class. It was just undisputable, He was just we had matching fleece sweaters, and he was a photographer. He was like very adventurous, and he was just my hero. And there was always just the two of us. And he's completely the reason that I'm a writer today, because I could do whatever I want, and I was just completely free and very, undisciplined as a child. And then I became 14, and my friends were all arty. We had decided to go to the art school. We had decided we were left side of the political spectrum. And then one day I came home, and the mayor of my town was sitting opposite my father in the kitchen, and he was the head of the Conservative Party in our town. And after he left, I was just, Dad, why are you talking to him? And my dad was like, what? I'm running for office for
Okay.
the Conservative Party. And so I had never really put that together. Like, we had never discussed politics. But from that moment on, we were like cat and dog, fighting about everything related to politics. And to the point that in 2018, we were meeting, 2 or 3 times a month, only to have like fierce arguments for 2 or 3 hours at a time, relentlessly, and like with like full of spite. It was just full of spite, and neither was listening to the other, and it was just having devastating effects on our relationship. So at that point, I was just beginning to like plead with my father, just please, let's stop talking about politics. Like, we're never gonna find a middle ground here. So you can say also that, the book is kind of in a way also me just trying to have a conversation with my father,
Okay.
about how we argue, and how we can both concede into the middle ground, and both kind of meet there without everything going to shit.
So you've spoken quite a lot there about emotion. You spoke about the people coming into the office, the TLS, no less, crying after this referendum result. And then you obviously spoke about this. It sounds like there's a lot of raw emotion there with your father. And it kind of, I think we think of politics as a kind of linguistics. It's about nuance. It's about articulation. But there's a lot in here about kind of raw emotion inspiring some of the novel here. Where do you sit with this? There's just a lot of emotion that's gone into that, and you've spoken very clearly about politics and how it's about dividing lines and that kind of thing. But there's, where does this kind of all this kind of emotion sit then in writing the novel?
It's a very good question. I would say that, like most writers, you're always searching for the tone before you begin. And when you've found the tone, then really it unfolds, uh, at least for me. So if I understand the emotions of the character and I understand their driving force and their wants and their fears, then I can go into the speculative, the philosophical, the intellectual. So for me, absolutely, the ground is always emotional. Absolutely. For me, that also affects their rhythm and their what you would call style. Like the punctuation in each character is very different, and that's really because they have different rhythms. Some people have mechanisms that that they try to keep themselves poised, and then other people have mechanism that they think in a more fluid beating sense or something like that.
Yeah. No, I get that, and so that's kind of gone into the novel and the craft. I mean, has your father read the novel?
It really did help us a lot.
Okay,
that
okay.
that novel. He was one of my first readers, and he obviously took what he wanted from the book. You can come to this book because I tried to not take too much of a stand for the reader. I let the reader decide, because we're going back and forth and we're kind of trying to bring out all of the arguments. Then I try to just kind of let it sit with the reader. And because of that, a lot of right-wing people have also loved the book. And a lot of my father's friends, for instance, that they think that it's like an anti-woke book, which is completely not the case for me. And thankfully, I have, most of my friends and most of the literary scene are people that would be considered woke, and so thankfully they don't find it anti-woke.
Is there a voice within all of this book then that came more naturally to you that you found easier to write? Or was it the voices that were a little bit different that you found easier to write?
I thought most of these came very naturally, but if I would turn the question around, I would probably say that I struggled most with Ólafur Tandri, who is the psychologist and who is in the utopia, he would be the good guy. But obviously, that's kind of a boring stance to take when you're writing a book that's supposed to be gray.
I mean, what do you think that says then about writing a novel like this? That these kind of, obviously you're talking about kind of polarization, but what do you think this says about writing a novel with so many different perspectives? If some of the voices came relatively naturally to you, as you said.
Well, I guess at least for me, the core, it's like a core interest for me as a writer to explore barriers and explore also, like, for instance, in my short story collection, I was very often looking at the young female from narrators who were older or different, looking at the young female from the perspective of the boyfriend or the mother-in-law, or so analyzing it through the eyes of the other, that would be the other for me. So I guess that's also what I loved doing that in the mark is also just kind of just go into a philosophical debate. Basically, what you do in when you're studying philosophy, which I did in university, is that you just go into rhetorics. And for me, that's it's a very gratifying thing to imagine all perspectives. But that's also maybe I'm a child of divorce, and I was a mediator between my father and my mother for my whole life. So that's also kind of, something that I love to do. I don't love to do it, but I do that in fiction, kind of mediate between arguments or try to see the reason behind both sides.
And it sounds like would you call it a sort of set of, I don't know if that'd be the right, not skills so much, but it is a role that you seem to suggest that it's come relatively naturally or learned to do to some extent. But I find it interesting that idea that we have to, I don't know if it is projection, we kind of see other aspects in people that we don't really like, but we kind of have to identify with, and having, do we contain, thinking about some of the characters in the mark on the different sides of the spectrum, the political spectrum, do they, are there things that they share as much as they kind of, are there things that we share with people across the political divide that we don't like to consider?
I think there are more things that unite us than divide us. Because if there were more things that would divide us than unite us, then we wouldn't be a society anymore. Then we would be two different societies, in my perspective.
What we see within the characters and the way that you write about them and the way you kind of go inside, their heads, we see that there are divides within the characters. This kind of internal monologue sections where you really go into an internal monologue, and you really kind of see the kind of anxiety to some extent of the kind of internal battle that's going on in these characters, not only just related to the referendum, but generally as we are as people too. I think it's the quote from the psychoanalyst, probably quite appropriate, Jacqueline Rose, that says, nations like people divide, and we are divided in ourselves. I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have a quick break on the Rippling pages, but do come back. We're going to talk a bit more about Frida's novel, The Mark. If you're enjoying today's episode with Frida, why not leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast provider? Over the years on the Rippling pages, we've had writers from all different parts of America, South Africa, Colombia, and now Iceland. But if you're enjoying this worldwide perspective of the podcast, do let us know you're enjoying it, and we'll bring you more, of course. See you soon. Welcome back. How was it? I just heard if you could tell us about writing some of these, writing about divides within characters. I don't know if you can tell us about some of the ways that you did that.
In Icelandic, the name of the book is merking, which has a double meaning. It means meaning, and then it means marking. So like I was just looking at how each of us put different meanings into the same words, and how we always have a little bit different vocabulary than the next person. And so that is also, just the core of it also is, how do we take a stand? How do we gather enough information to know which way to, lean towards? And really, isn't it just like so much chance what opinions we are exposed to, what information we are exposed to every day, and what people will convince us in our lifetimes? We are in this net, in this, giant project that we call society, and we're just like, it's just so much chance. Like I think just so much of our opinion and our political stance is due to chance. And I think such a small percentage of the population really goes into resources, like finding like what you would call proper information. So that was maybe what I was always thinking about, like what information has this character been exposed to? Like where is she coming from? Where is he coming from? Which echo chambers do they belong to? And then what happens when they're exposed to new ideas and new arguments? And because it is kind of also easy to convince us. When somebody is convincing, it's very easy to be convinced. And that's at least what I am exposed to every day, because I have my opinions from the left, and then I have to argue with my father every week for 2 hours, and then I have to hear his echo chamber, and I have to hear the right's opinion of the same matter. When things are driven by emotion, then it's very easy to be lured into that opinion. When things are driven by fear or hate or anger, that's very convincing. It's very convincing forces, basically.
The heart of this novel is there's this empathy test. Empathy is a very specific choice. Why does it have to be an empathy test? Considering all that you've just said about politics and how we make our choices about politics.
Basically, since the 70s, empathy has been kind of the magic solution or antidote towards hate. I thought it was just like a very interesting idea to see if there was a dark side of empathy, and if empathy can kind of carry also some blind spots as well. Like if empathy can't be as blinding as prejudice, basically, because it's quite easy to write empathetic characters, or like it's not easy to write convincing, really well-made empathetic characters, obviously. But let's say that we were writing a movie, make the main character save an animal or give, an apple to a homeless person. You remember there's something about Mary? Like that's what she does in the first 5 minutes of her arc. Let's say, like she throws an apple to a homeless person, and then she feeds the dog some sausage or something, and then we know that Mary is a great, great woman. Um, and
So we've got a device here. You're saying that there's a device that can be used to make us. Is it to make? Well, it makes the character look empathetic, doesn't it? But it's a trigger for the audience, isn't it? To empathize with that character, to get on board with their. It sounds like you're talking about goodness here,
absolutely,
in
yeah,
inverted commas, and what
yeah.
goodness might mean.
What tickled me also in having an empathy test was obviously just like, okay, we have empathetic people that have all been marked as empathetic people, but then they can switch off their empathy towards the unempathetic people and marginalize them, basically, because that's what we do. So we kind of empathize with our group, and we empathize with the people that share our values and belong to our herd. But as soon as they don't accept the values of the herd, or cannot accept or cannot participate, then we marginalize them.
So I guess within all this, then, are you trying to set the reader up to find it hard to side with the character necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of looking into what signals you need. So I was always, for my first readers, I asked them to read the first half, and then I would ask them, okay, how do you empathize with this one now? And how do you empathize with this one now? And how do you empathize with just experiments with empathy and reading, because what happens if one character has really harsh and vulgar language, what happens if his Icelandic is very broken? Like, will it lessen the reader's empathy towards him? Also, what happens if they don't get any backstory? Like, that was really interesting for me, like as a craft maker, just not giving one character any backstory and seeing how the reader would empathize with that character, and what bridges the reader would try to make between herself or himself and the character, and and then I took one character, and she only gets direct speech when she herself speaks, but nobody else around her. so experiments like that. I was just like very much looking into that kind of baggage the reader will bring with them.
Yeah, I guess we all do, don't we? We all project, don't we? We all project our, or transference. We kind of bring our ideas of relationships into other relationships, and they influence whether we like to acknowledge that or not. And I guess your novel asks that in a lot more pronounced way than perhaps other novels do. But I think it's something within literature that we have an opportunity to access, maybe. Who stands to profit from all of this?
I guess it's the same kind of profit as everybody that wants to control, you know. The fear wins, when you get a little bit more surveillance in the world. Surveillance and fear are basically, siblings. So it's the same as, controlling, I guess, whatever you want to control. It's surveillance, safety, and yeah, I was very occupied with private and public spaces when I wrote the book, and so some reader told me afterward, like one of my friends who was reading the manuscript, she said, um, everybody's breaking into each other's houses, and then I realized, yeah, okay, of course, it's because it's the private and public houses as well. I am looking into where the territory of the individual, ends, and where the territory of society begins, and also like what happens when society wants to come into the holiest of your spaces, which is your mind.
I don't know if there was kind of any kind of literary precedent that you had within this novel.
No, I guess it's I mean, obviously there are so many other writers that, the rivers run through my words, but I would say that I'm mostly inspired by uh writers that experiment a lot, and that would be like George Saunders, for instance. In Britain, that would be maybe Ali Smith. I love, that people that do have like social commentary in their books, but they also have just a lot of fun, and they do, literary experiments, and experiments with form, and so that for me really puts me on flames, when I'm reading those kind of writers. Fernanda Melchor, I love her. It's so good. But that's exactly, like, she is very political, and she's very it's a very big social commentary, but it's still like just so literary as well.
What is what's the kind of culture like for literature in Iceland? I've heard it's fantastic. I've heard if this is a myth or not, but I've heard that 1 in 10 of the population is a published writer or something. I don't know if
Hmm.
that's true or not. Is that true?
I think it's true. Yeah. But I guess when it comes to publishing, the fun thing about Iceland is that since World War II, the book has been the number one Christmas present every year. So in response to that, the publishing industry publishes 90% of their titles from the 1st of October until the 15th of November. And so it just comes like this oversaturation of books, and it's really hard to get press. It's really hard to get reviews, and it's very easy to be drowned, or flooded. It's called the Christmas book flood, basically. But what also happens is that the whole country starts reading, and so basically people stop asking what you're watching. They start asking what you're reading, and companies, they will hire authors to read from their books, basically.
Right. Okay.
So if you the most extravagances of these would be like huge rich companies will have like the Christmas party with 500 people, and they will hire like nice chefs, and then they will hire 5 writers, and each writer will be reading like 15 to 20 minutes throughout the whole evening, and people will just listen,
Wow, that
at
sounds
their
amazing.
Christmas party. And then that company will have the books brought in by a bookseller, and everybody can do their Christmas shopping in the Christmas party and get signed copies. And then the employer will just take all of the books and put it on, like, and withdraw it from their paychecks on the 1st of January.
Right.
So they
Okay.
do the Christmas shopping like that. Just
Oh,
like
interesting.
it just goes on their credit within the company in these 2 months.
Flipping heck. Wow. And
Yeah,
so have you done that? Have you done that, or will you be doing this, or have
yeah,
you done? And
yeah,
right,
yeah.
okay. Wow. Makes me think about the status of the writer on this, but the kind of public standing of the writer and what role they kind of play. And I know you've spoken about this before, the role that the writer plays in. I think is the quote that you said in a previous interview was that writers they are dangerous, or they used to be, dangerous. They used to kind of provide a public role to some extent. Are we kind of trying to get at the kind of, do writers have a public duty, do you think?
I would like to believe so. And I mean, we don't have to go very far. We have to maybe take a plane for 6 hours, and then we will be somewhere where it's very, very dangerous to publish a book. Obviously, books are so vital because we have to give voice to, we have to have this barrier, fictional barrier, to be able to put so many things into words that we would never put into words if we only had nonfiction. One word that I love in Icelandic is the Icelandic word for psychologist, which is sálfræðingur, which is soul specialist. And it's just like, I don't think that we would get into the depths of the human condition without fiction, because we could never have, we need to have that fictional barrier to say, oh, it's not me who is thinking these things, it's this character. I'm thinking like this character.
Mm.
So in a way, that's dangerous as well.
Can be dangerous, can it? I guess, or it can be perceived as dangerous, or threatening.
Mm.
Um, what's that word again? Soul,
Sálfræðingur.
soulflangush.
Sál is soul, and then
Yep.
fræðingur is specialist, expert, theorist, theoretic,
Okay, okay.
theory.
Well, we are nearly, perhaps quite scarily approaching that time of the year, and we are getting to one of the most, even in the UK, we're getting to one of the most exciting publishing periods. But the Mark is out now, and you can go out and buy that and treat yourself to a pre-Christmas treat. Translated by Larissa Kaiser from the Icelandic, published by Faber. I've heartily enjoyed getting to know your book, getting to know you as well, Frida. Thank you so much for being on the Reading Pages.
Thank you.